He was the man everyone admired, a self-made millionaire who built an empire in healthcare. At 53 years old, he had everything most could only dream of: wealth, power, and respect. But behind the polished image of a generous CEO lay a man grieving the loss of his beloved wife, a pain he carried quietly for years. When a stunning 25-year-old woman walked into his life, she seemed to be his second chance at happiness. For the first time in a long while, the lonely widower smiled again, and the people around him saw the light returning to his eyes. Yet not everyone believed in the fairy tale. Whispers began almost immediately. Was it love, or something far darker? The stark difference in their ages became the topic of murmurs at dinner parties and boardroom meetings. Friends urged him to slow down, warning that her intentions might not be pure. Even his grown children, protective of their father and his legacy, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that there was more to her charm than met the eye. Still, he defended her. She made him feel alive, he would say. She had brought laughter and joy back into his home. And despite the doubts of others, he saw a future with her, one filled with hope and companionship. But what he didn't see was the shadow lurking behind her perfect smile, the carefully hidden cracks in her facade that would eventually shatter his life. Their story began like a romantic dream but would unravel into a nightmare no one could have foreseen. It wasn't just a love story. It was a story of manipulation, greed, and betrayal. A story where one fateful decision could turn a promise of happiness into a chilling tragedy. As we piece together the events of this puzzling case, one thing is certain. The man who gave his heart to a young woman never imagined she would take everything, including his life. This is the haunting tale of a love that spiraled into treachery, and a crime so calculated it shook an entire community to its core. Stay with me as we uncover the shocking truth behind the death of a man who trusted too much and loved too deeply. Richard Caldwell, a name that carried weight in the healthcare industry. Known as a visionary leader, Richard wasn't just a CEO. He was a trailblazer who built his company from the ground up. His innovations saved lives, his philanthropy inspired countless others, and his charisma commanded respect wherever he went. At 53, Richard was at the pinnacle of his career, admired not only for his business acumen, but also for his generosity and integrity. But behind the confident smile and tailored suits lay a man who had endured unspeakable heartbreak. 5 years earlier, Richard's life was shattered when his wife, Margaret, the love of his life for over 30 years, died in a car accident. She was his rock, his partner in every sense of the word, and her sudden death left a void no achievement or accolade could fill. For years, Richard buried himself in work, finding solace only in the legacy he was building. He became not just a widower, but a father trying to hold his family together, supporting his 2 grown children, Amelia and Thomas, as they mourned the loss of their mother. Then, like a spark in the darkness, came someone who seemed to breathe life back into Richard's world. Her name was Vanessa Hayes, a 25-year-old woman whose beauty was only rivaled by her magnetic charm. With her vibrant laughter and radiant presence, Vanessa made Richard feel something he hadn't in years. Hope. She was captivating, always knowing just what to say to make him smile. And for the first time since Margaret's passing, he felt as though life had meaning beyond work and memories. Their relationship blossomed quickly, much to the concern of those closest to Richard. His children, Amelia and Thomas, were the first to voice their doubts. The age gap was glaring, and they couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa's intentions were less about love and more about opportunity. Friends and colleagues echoed their concerns in hushed conversations, questioning what a young, glamorous woman could possibly see in a man nearly 50 years her senior. But Richard dismissed their warnings. He saw in Vanessa not a gold digger but a second chance, a reason to believe in love again. He often told his children that Vanessa had brought light back into his life when he thought it would forever remain dark. She made him laugh, helped him relax, and seemed to adore him in a way that felt genuine. Despite the whispers of doubt around him, Richard was certain he had found happiness again. Still, Richard wasn't naive. Years of running a successful business had taught him the value of caution, and he was acutely aware of the potential risks involved in marrying someone so much younger. While he lavished Vanessa with gifts and promised her a future together, he made one thing clear: his empire would remain protected. When he quietly drafted his will, the bulk of his fortune was left to Amelia and Thomas, ensuring that his children would inherit the legacy he had built with Margaret. Vanessa, though not excluded entirely, was allocated a modest 10%, enough to support her if anything happened to him, but not enough to upend the balance of his estate. What Richard didn't anticipate was how this decision would ignite a fire in Vanessa that he had never seen before. She wasn't meant to know about the will, but one careless oversight changed everything. A confidential document, accidentally left in a drawer she had no business opening, revealed the truth. Her fairy tale vision of a life of wealth and control came crashing down in an instant. Vanessa was furious. She felt betrayed by the man who had promised her the world, but in her eyes was preparing to cast her aside. She didn't confront him directly, not yet. Instead, she began to plot a plan so calculated, so cold, it would leave even the most skeptical observers stunned. Her first target was Richard's lawyer, Peter Halstead, a man as professional as he was easily swayed by temptation. Vanessa knew she couldn't alter the will alone, but with Peter's cooperation everything could change. Using her beauty and cunning, she set out to manipulate him, weaving a web of seduction and deceit that would test the limits of loyalty and morality. For Vanessa, this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control, and proving she could outsmart everyone who had doubted her. What Vanessa didn't realize, however, was that her carefully laid plans were about to set off a chain of events she could no longer control. A series of missteps and discoveries that would lead to an ending no one could have imagined. Richard Alden's world began to unravel slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The woman he had once described as his saving grace, his second chance at love, began to change in ways he couldn't quite put into words. Sabrina's radiant smile, the one that had brought him so much comfort, started to feel hollow. Her warmth, which had been his refuge from years of grief, now seemed carefully measured. Something was different, and Richard could feel it in his bones. It started with the phone calls. Sabrina had always been open, almost proudly so, about her conversations and connections, but now her phone was glued to her side. She would step away mid-conversation, her voice hushed, her tone clipped. When Richard asked who she had been speaking to, her answers were vague, evasive. "Just a friend," she'd say, flashing him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And then there were the absences. Sabrina, who once spent every waking moment by his side, now had reasons to leave the house at odd hours. Errands, appointments, visits to a friend. Her explanations were always casual, but her timing felt calculated. Richard tried to reason with himself, to chalk it up to his own insecurities. After all, she was much younger than him, with her own life and her own needs, but the doubt was there, gnawing at him like a splinter he couldn't remove. Her impatience was the final crack in the facade. Sabrina had always been playful and charming, but now she seemed irritated by the smallest things. She would snap at him over trivial matters, her voice laced with a sharpness he hadn't heard before. When Richard tried to discuss it, to understand what was happening, she dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. "You're imagining things," she would say, her tone dismissive, almost condescending. Richard's suspicions grew, and with them his resolve to confront the woman he had once trusted with his heart. One evening, after dinner, he finally found the courage to address the tension that had been building between them. His voice trembled as he spoke, the weight of his emotions making it hard to breathe. "Sabrina," he began, his eyes searching hers, "I need to know the truth. What's going on with you? With us?" Her reaction was immediate and explosive. Sabrina's face twisted in anger, her voice rising with every word. She accused him of being paranoid, of doubting her love after everything they had been through. But Richard didn't back down. For the first time he voiced the fears that had been haunting him. "I've given you everything," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't ignore what I'm seeing. The phone calls, the secrets, the lies. I won't be made a fool." And then he dropped the bombshell. Richard told her he planned to end the relationship. His heart ached as he said the words, but he knew he couldn't go on like this. Sabrina's reaction was unlike anything he had anticipated. Her anger gave way to desperation, her voice trembling as she begged him to reconsider. But Richard had made up his mind. "I won't live in a house where trust is a question," he said, turning away from the woman who had once been his entire world. That was the last time anyone would see Richard Alden alive. The next morning, his lifeless body was discovered in the grand living room of his mansion. The scene was a study in contradiction. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be a tragic accident. Richard could have easily suffered a fall or a sudden health crisis, but the details didn't add up. There were bruises on his arms and neck, marks that didn't align with the supposed fall. A vase lay shattered near his body, but the placement seemed off, almost staged. And then there was Sabrina. She was calm, too calm. While others were frantic, calling for help, she stood to the side, her expression unreadable, her voice steady as she answered the paramedics' questions. Detectives were called in, and it didn't take long for them to uncover the cracks in Sabrina's story. Neighbors came forward, recounting heated arguments they had overheard in the days leading up to Richard's death. One even mentioned seeing a shadowy figure in the Alden home late at night, long after the lights had gone out. Security footage from the house revealed Sabrina entering Richard's office at an unusual hour, just hours before his death. Her movements were deliberate, her face obscured by a scarf. The evidence was mounting, but the most damning revelation came from the autopsy. Richard Alden hadn't died from a fall. He had been drugged. Traces of a powerful sedative were found in his system, a substance that could only have come from someone close to him. A search of Sabrina's belongings uncovered a vial of the same drug, hidden in the lining of her handbag. When confronted, Sabrina maintained her innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. Detectives pieced together a chilling narrative. Sabrina, desperate to secure her place in Richard's fortune, had resorted to murder. Her affair with Mark Sullivan, the family lawyer, was another layer of deceit. Though Mark admitted to the relationship, he denied altering the will, claiming he had been manipulated by Sabrina's lies. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. And they painted a devastating picture. A story of trust betrayed, love manipulated, and a life cut short in the pursuit of greed. The day the handcuffs clicked around Sabrina's wrists, she didn't flinch. Her face, once adorned with a practiced mask of elegance, betrayed nothing. Cameras flashed as she was led from the Alden estate, her demeanor calm, almost defiant, as though she believed this was all some terrible misunderstanding that would soon be resolved. But the detectives escorting her knew better. They had spent weeks piecing together the intricate web of lies she had spun, and now they had her exactly where she belonged. Sabrina was charged with premeditated murder, a crime that, if proven, would send her to prison for the rest of her life. She maintained her innocence from the start, claiming that Richard's death was a tragic accident. She painted herself as a devoted wife who had loved her husband deeply, insisting that the accusations were a cruel twist of fate. Her tears, however, didn't move the investigators, and the mountain of evidence against her suggested a far darker reality. The trial became a media sensation. Every seat in the courtroom was filled as reporters, spectators, and legal experts watched the case unfold. Sabrina entered the room each day with the same composure she had shown during her arrest, dressed impeccably and carrying herself with an air of confidence. But as the prosecution began to lay out their case, the cracks in her facade became visible. The evidence was damning, a collection of facts and details that painted a chilling picture of greed and premeditation. The prosecutor began with the text messages, hundreds of them exchanged between Sabrina and Mark Sullivan, the family lawyer. These weren't just casual conversations, they were strategic discussions about Richard's will and how to secure Sabrina's financial future. The messages revealed her growing frustration with Richard's decision to leave the majority of his wealth to his children, along with thinly veiled threats that something needed to be done. Then came the financial records. Sabrina had tried, and failed, to gain unauthorized access to Richard's accounts in the weeks leading up to his death. Withdrawals and account inquiries she had no business making were traced back to her, each one a desperate attempt to secure money that wasn't hers to take. The records told a story of someone who knew her time was running out and was willing to risk everything to get what she wanted. But the most chilling revelation was about the sedatives. A receipt from a local pharmacy showed that Sabrina had purchased the drugs just days before Richard's death. The pharmacist who sold them to her testified, recounting how Sabrina had claimed they were for a relative suffering from insomnia. This was a lie, of course, and the timing of the purchase was impossible to ignore. The prosecution didn't stop there. They called neighbors to the stand, each of whom painted a disturbing picture of the days leading up to Richard's death. Loud arguments had been heard, with one witness recalling Sabrina's voice shouting, "You'll regret this," in the middle of the night. Another neighbor testified that Sabrina had appeared unusually cheerful the morning after Richard died, a demeanor that now seemed sickeningly calculated. Security footage from the Alden estate was also played for the jury. The grainy video showed Sabrina sneaking into Richard's office late at night, her movements deliberate and cautious. She was seen holding a small vial, later identified as the sedatives found in Richard's system. The footage was a smoking gun, one that Sabrina's defense team couldn't explain away. Throughout the trial, Sabrina's composure began to falter. Her defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no definitive proof she had administered the sedatives. They painted her as a victim of her circumstances, a young woman overwhelmed by the pressures of a marriage to an older, controlling man. But the jury wasn't swayed. The facts were clear, and they told a story of cold, calculated murder. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty. Sabrina was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, she sat motionless, her expression unreadable. The same courtroom that had watched her every move fell silent, the weight of justice finally settling over the room. In the aftermath of the trial, Richard Alden's children inherited the fortune their father had built, but instead of using it for personal gain, they chose to honor his memory by establishing the Richard Alden Foundation. The organization focused on supporting victims of domestic abuse and financial exploitation, turning their family's tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. The case became a cautionary tale, one that captivated the public's imagination long after the trial ended. It was a story of trust betrayed, of a man who gave his heart to the wrong person, and of the devastating lengths some will go in the name of greed. Richard Alden's name lived on, not as the victim of a gold digger's schemes, but as a symbol of resilience and hope in the face of unspeakable betrayal. This is a story that lingers in the mind long after the final chapter has closed, a tale of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed. But before we close this case, let me ask you, do you think justice was truly served? Sabrina sits behind bars, her life reduced to the echoes of her crimes. But could it have been different? Could the signs of her intentions have been spotted earlier, perhaps even prevented? Was the CEO right to suspect her motives, or was he blinded by the chance to find love again after such a profound loss? What would you have done in Richard Alden's place? Would you have seen through the charm, the beauty, and the promises? Or would you too have given her the benefit of the doubt, hoping against hope that she was genuine? These are the questions that make stories like this so deeply haunting. And then there's Sabrina. Was she a victim of her circumstances, pushed to desperation by a life she felt she couldn't control? Or was she the cold, calculating architect of her own downfall, willing to destroy anything and anyone in her path to secure her future? Her actions tell one story, but her defense paints another. What do you believe? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you think Sabrina's life sentence was the justice Richard deserved? Or do you think the punishment fell short? Let us know in the comments below. Your perspective matters. Before you go, if this story gripped you, Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another deep dive into the most shocking true crime stories. Share this case with someone who loves unraveling mysteries, and let's see what they think about Sabrina Alden's twisted journey. As we conclude, let's reflect on the harsh truths this case brings to light. Love is a powerful force, capable of healing, but when greed seeps into its foundation, it can lead to unthinkable acts. Richard Alden wanted to believe in love again. He wanted to find happiness in the final chapters of his life, but instead, he became the victim of a dark and deadly ambition. Sabrina Alden now sits in a prison cell, likely replaying the choices that led her there, a promising life traded for lies, deceit, and ultimately murder. Was it worth it? The answer seems painfully clear. Thank you for joining me for this gripping story. Remember, every case we cover holds lessons and warnings, and every detail adds to our understanding of the human heart's complexities. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth true crime investigations that peel back the layers of deceit and bring you the stories behind the headlines. Stay safe out there, and until next time, take care of yourself and those you love.